Sometimes the quietest valleys hold the most powerful endings. For many nights now we have walked together through the deep forests, followed the winding rivers, and listened to the whispers carried by the northern wind. And tonight, our journey through the Valley of Silent Men reaches its final chapter, but endings in the wilderness are never loud. They arrive gently, like the fading glow of a campfire, or the last light of sunset disappearing behind distant mountains. What secrets will finally reveal themselves? What truths have been waiting in the silence all along? As the night grows deeper and the valley grows still, let us take one final step into the story. So relax, take a slow breath, and allow the quiet world. There was no footing except where he stood, and Maret was not with him. Only the truth could batter at his brain as he stood there, but his physical self refused to accept that truth. If he had lived, she must live. She was there, somewhere along the shore, among the rocks. The moaning in his throat gave way to the voicing of her name. He shouted and listened. He swayed back along the tongue of rock to the boulder-strewn edge of the chasm wall. 100 yards farther on was the opening of the chute. He came out of this, his clothes torn from him, his body bleeding, unrecognizable, half a madman, shouting her name more and more loudly. The glow of the setting sun struck him at last. He was out from between the chasm walls, and it lighted up the green world for him. Ahead of him the river widened and swept on in tranquil quiet, and now it was no longer fear that possessed him. It was the horrible, overwhelming certainty of the thing. The years fell from him, and he sobbed like a boy stricken by some great childish grief, as he searched along the edge of the shore. Over and over again he cried and whispered Maret's name, but he did not shout it again, for he knew that she was dead. She was gone from him forever. Yet he did not cease to search. The last of the sun went out, twilight came, and then darkness. Even in that darkness he continued to search for a mile below the chute, calling her name more loudly now, and listening always for the answer which he knew would never come. The moon came out after a time, and hour after hour he kept up his hopeless quest. He did not know how badly the rocks had battered and hurt him, and he scarcely knew when it was that exhaustion dropped him like a dead man in his tracks. When dawn came, found him wandering away from the river, and toward noon of that day he was found by André Boileau, the old white-haired half-breed who trapped on Birdwood Creek. André was shocked at the sight of his wounds, and half dragged and half carried him to his shack, hidden away in the forest. For 6 days thereafter, Kent remained at old André's place, simply because he had neither the strength nor the reason to move. André wondered that there were no broken bones in him, but his head was terribly hurt, and it was that hurt that for 3 days and 3 nights made Kent hover with nerve-wracking indecision between life. The 4th day, reason came back to him, and Boileau fed him venison broth. The 5th day, he stood up. The 6th, he thanked André and said that he was ready to go. Andre outfitted him with clothes, gave him a supply of food and God's blessing, and Kent returned to the chute, giving Andre to understand that his destination was Athabasca Landing. Kent knew that it was not wise for him to return to the river. He knew that it would have been better for him, both in mind and body, had he gone the opposite direction. But he no longer had in him the desire to fight, even for himself. He followed the lines of least resistance, and these led him back to the scene of the tragedy. His grief, when he returned, was no longer the heartbreaking agony of that first night. It was a deep-seated, consuming fire that had already burned him out, heart and soul. Even caution was dead in him. He feared nothing, avoided nothing. Had the police boat been at the chute, he would have revealed himself without any thought of self-preservation. A ray of hope would have been precious medicine to him, but there was no hope. Marette was dead. Her tender body was destroyed, and he was alone, unfathomably and hopelessly alone. And now, after he had reached the river again, something held him there. From the head of the chute to a bend in the river, 2 miles below, his feet wore a beaten trail. 3 or 4 times a day he would make the trip, and along the path he set a few snares in which he caught rabbits for food. Each night he made his bed in a crevice among the rocks at the foot of the chute. At the end of a week, the old Shim Kent was dead. Even O'Connor would not have recognized him. With his shaggy growth of beard, his hollow eyes, and the sunken cheeks, which the beard failed to hide, and the fighting spirit in him also was dead. Once or twice there leaped up in him a sudden passion, demanding vengeance upon the accursed law that was accountable for the death of Marette. But even this flame snuffed itself out quickly. And then, on the 8th day, he saw the edge of a thing that was almost hidden under an overhanging bank. He fished it out. It was Marette's little pack, and for many minutes before he opened it, Kent crushed the sodden treasure to his breast, staring with half-mad eyes down where he had found it, as if Marette must be there too. Then he ran with it to an open space, where the sun fell warmly on a great flat rock that was level with the ground, and with sobbing breath he opened it. It was filled with the things she had picked up quickly in her room the night of their flight from Ketsty's bungalow, and as he drew them out one by one and placed them in the sun on the rock, a new and sudden rush of life swept through his veins, and he sprang to his feet and faced the river again, as if at last a hope had come to him. Then he looked down again upon what she had treasured, and reaching out his arms to them, he whispered, "Marette, my little goddess." Even in his grief, the overwhelming mastery of his love for the one who was dead brought a smile to his haggard and bearded face. For Marette, in filling her little pack on that night of hurried flight, had chosen strange things. On the sunlit rock where he had placed them were a pair of the little pumps which he had fallen on his knees to worship in her room, and with these she had crowded into the pack one of the billowing, sweet-smelling dresses which had made his heart stand still for a moment when he first looked into their hiding place. It was no longer soft and cobwebby as it had been then, like down fluttering against his cheeks, but sodden and discolored as it lay on the rock, with little rivulets of water running from it. With the shoes and the dress were the intimate necessities which Maret had taken with her. But it was one of the pumps that Kent picked up and crushed close to his ragged breast, one of the two she had worn that first wonderful day she had come to see him at Cardigan's place. This hour was the beginning of another change in Kent. It seemed to him that a message had come to him from Maret herself, that the spirit of her had returned to him and was with him now, stirring strange things in his soul and warming his blood with a new heat. She was gone forever, and yet she had come back to him, and the truth grew upon him that this spirit of her would never leave him again. As long as he lived, he felt her nearness. Unconsciously he reached out his arms, and a strange happiness entered into him, to a battle with grief and loneliness. His eyes shone with a new glow as they looked at her little belongings on the sunlit rock. It was as if they were flesh and blood of her, a part of her heart and soul. They were the voice for faith in him, her promise that she would be with him always. For the first time in days, Kent felt a new force within him, and he knew that she was not quite gone, that he had something of her left to fight for. That night, he made his bed for a last time in the crevice between the rocks, and his treasure was gathered within the protecting circle of his arms as he slept. The next day, he struck out north and east. On the 5th day after he left the country of Andre Boileau, he traded his watch to a half-breed for a cheap gun, ammunition, a blanket, flour, and a cooking outfit. After that, he had no hesitation in burying himself still deeper into the forests. A month later, no one would have recognized Kent as the one-time crack man of N Division. Bearded, ragged, long-haired, he wandered with no other purpose than to be alone and to get still farther away from the river. Occasionally, he talked with an Indian or a half-breed. Each night, though the weather was very warm, he made himself a small campfire, for it was always in these hours, with the firelight about him, that he felt Maret was very near. It was then that he took out one by one the precious things that were in Maret's little pack. He worshipped these things, the dress and each of the little shoes he had wrapped in the velvety inner bark of the birch tree. He protected them from wet and storm. Had emergency called for it, he would have fought for them. They became, after a time, more precious than his own life, and in a vague sort of way, at first, he began to thank God that the river had not robbed him of everything. Kent's inclination was not to fight himself into forgetfulness. He wanted to remember every act, every word, every treasured caress that chained him for all time to the love he had lost. Maret became more a part of him every day. Dead in the flesh, she was always at his side, nestling close in the shelter of his arms at night, walking with her hand in his during the day. And in this belief, his grief was softened by the sweet and merciful comfort of a possession of which neither man nor fate could rob him, a beloved presence always with him. It was this presence that rebuilt Kent. It urged him to throw up his head again, to square his shoulders, to look life once more straight in the face. It was both inspiration and courage to him, and grew nearer and dearer to him as time passed. That winter, he joined the Frenchmen, and until February, they trapped along the edges of the lower fingers of the barons. He came to think a great deal of Picard, his comrade, but he revealed nothing of his secret to him, or of the new desire that was growing in him, and as the winter lengthened, this desire became a deep and abiding yearning. It was with him night and day. He dreamed of it when he slept, and it was never out of his thoughts. When awake, he wanted to go home, and when he thought of home, it was not of the landing and not of the country south. For him, home meant only one place in the world now, the place where Meret had lived. Somewhere, hidden in the mountains far north and west, was that mysterious valley of silent men, where they had been going when her body died, and the spirit of her wanted him to go to it now. It was like a voice pleading with him, urging him to go, to live there always where she had lived. He would find her home, her people, the valley that was to have been their paradise. So late in February, with his share of the winter catch in his pack, he said goodbye to Picard and faced the river again. Chapter 24. And had not forgotten that he was an outlaw, but he was not afraid. Now that he had something new and thrilling to fight for, he fell back again upon what he called the finesse of the game. He approached Chipewyan cautiously, although he was sure that even his old friends at the landing would fail to recognize him now. His beard was 4 or 5 inches long, and his hair was shaggy and uncut. Picard had made him a coat that winter of young caribou skin, and it was fringed like an Indian's. Kent chose his time and entered Chipewyan just before dusk. The place was empty except for the factor's clerk, and for an hour he bartered. He bought a new outfit, a Winchester rifle, and all the supplies he could carry. He did not forget a razor and a pair of shears, and when he was done, he still had the value of 2 silver fox skins in cash. He left Chipewyan that same night. He was on the Slave River now, and for weeks travelled slowly but steadily northward. On snowshoes, he avoided Fort Smith and Smith Landing and struck westward before he came to Fort Resolution. It was in April that he struck Hay River Post, where the Hay River empties into Great Slave Lake. Until the ice broke up, Kent worked at Hay River. When it was safe, he started down the Mackenzie in a canoe. It was late in June when he turned up the Liard to the South Nahanni. You go straight through between the sources of the North and the South Nahanni, Maretta told him. It is there you find the Sulphur Country, and beyond the Sulphur Country is the Valley of Silent Men. At last he came to the edge of this country. He camped with the stink of fit in his nostrils. The moon rose, and he saw the desolate world as through the fumes of a yellow smoke. With dawn he went on. He passed through broad, low morasses, out of which rose sulphurous fogs. Mile after mile he buried himself deeper in it, and it became more and more a dead country, a lost hell. There were berry bushes on which there grew no berries. There were forests and swamps, but without a living creature to inhabit them. It was a country of water, in which there were no fish, of air in which there were no birds, of plants without flowers, a reeking stinking country, still with the stillness of death. He began to turn yellow. His clothing, his canoe, his hands, face, everything turned yellow. He could not get the filthy taste of sulfur out of his mouth. Yet he kept on, straight west by the compass Gowan had given him at Hay River. Even this compass became yellow in his pocket. It was impossible for him to eat. Only twice that day did he drink from his flask of water, and Maretta made this journey. He kept telling himself that it was the secret way in and out of their hidden world, a region accursed by devils, forbidden country to both Indian and white man. It was hard for him to believe that she had come this way, that she had drunk in the air that was filling his own lungs, nauseating him a dozen times to the point of sickness. He worked desperately. He felt neither fatigue nor the heat of the warm water about him. Night came, and the moon rose, lighting up with a sickly glow the diseased world that had swallowed him. He lay in the bottom of his canoe, covering his face with his caribou coat, and tried to sleep, but sleep would not come. Before dawn, he struck on, watching his compass by the light of matches. All that day he made no effort to swallow food, but with the coming of the second night, he found the air easier to breathe. He fought his way on by the light of the moon, which was clearer now, and at last, in the resting spell, he heard far ahead of him the howl of a wolf. In his joy, he cried out. A western breeze brought him air that he drank in as a desert-stricken man drinks water. He did not look at his compass again, but worked steadily in the face of that fresh air. An hour later, he found that he was paddling again, slow current, and when he tasted the water, it was only slightly tainted with sulfur. He landed on a shore of sand and pebbles, stripped to the skin, and gave himself such a scoring as he had never before experienced. He had worn his old trapping shirt and trousers, and after his bath he changed the outfit, which he had kept clean, in his pack. Then he built fire and ate his first meal in 2 days. The next morning he climbed a tall spruce and surveyed the country about him. Westward there was a broad, low country, shut in 15 or 20 miles away by the foothills. Beyond these foothills rose the snow-capped peaks of the Rockies. He shaved himself, cut his hair, and went on. That night he camped only when he could drive his canoe no farther. The waterway had narrowed to a creek, and he was among the first green shoulders of the hills when he stopped. With another dawn he concealed his canoe in a sheltered place and went on with his pack. For a week he picked his way slowly westward. It was a splendid country into which he had come, and yet he found no sign of human life. The foothills changed to mountains, and he believed he was in the Campbell Range. Also he knew that he had followed the logical trail from the sulfur country. Yet it was the 8th day before he came upon a sign which told him that another living being had at some time passed that way. What he found were the charred remnants of an old campfire. It had been a white man's fire. He knew that by the size of it. It had been an all-night fire of green logs cut with an axe. On the 10th day he came to the westward slope of the first range and looked down upon one of the most wonderful valleys his eyes had ever beheld. It was Mordor Valley. It was a broad plain 50 miles across it rose the towering majesty of the mightiest of all the Yukon mountains, and now, though he saw a paradise about him, his heart began to sink within him. It seemed to him inconceivable that in a country so vast he could find the spot for which he was seeking. His one hope lay in finding white men or Indians, someone who might guide him. He traveled slowly over the 50-mile plain, rich with a verdure of green, covered with flowers, a game paradise. Few hunters had come so far out of the Yukon mountains, he told himself, and none had come from out of the sulphur country. It was a new and undiscovered world. On his map, it was a blank space, and there were no signs of people. Ahead of him, the Yukon mountains rose in an impenetrable wall, peak after peak, crested with snow, towering like mighty watchdogs above the clouds. He knew what lay beyond them, the great rivers of the western slope, Dawson City, the gold country, and its civilization. On his side, there was only the vast and undisputed silence of paradise, as yet unclaimed by man. As he went on into this valley, there grew upon him a strange and comforting peace. Yet with it, there was a steadily increasing belief that he would not find that for which he had come in search. He did not attempt to analyze this belief. It became a part of him, just as his mental tranquility had grown upon him. His one hope of success was that nearer the mountains he might find white men or Indians. He no longer used his compass, but guided himself by a cluster of 3 gigantic peaks. One of these was taller than the other 2. As he journeyed, his eyes were always returning to it. It fascinated him, impinged itself upon him as the watcher of 1,000,000 years guarding the valley. He began to think of it as the watcher. Each hour of his progress seemed to bring it a little more intimately to his vision. From his first night's camp in the valley, he saw the moon sink behind it. Within him, a voice that never died kept whispering to him that this mountain, greater than all the others, had been Maret's guardian. 10,000 times she must have looked at it as he had looked at it. Day, if her home was anywhere this side of the Campbell Range. 100 miles away, she could have seen the watcher on a clear day. On the second day, the mountain continued to grow upon Kent. The peak of it was in the form of a mighty castle that changed as he advanced, and the 2 lesser peaks were forming into definite contours. Before the haze of twilight dimmed his vision, he knew that what he had seen was not a whimsical invention of his imagination. The watcher had grown into the shape of a mighty human head facing south. A restless excitement possessed him, and he traveled on long after dusk. At dawn, he was on the trail again. Westward, the sky cleared, and suddenly he stopped, and a cry came from him. The watcher's head was there, as if chiseled by the hands of giants. The 2 smaller peaks had unveiled their mystery, startling and weird. Their crests had taken on the form of human heads. One of them was looking north, the other faced the valley, and Kent, heart pounding, cried to himself, "The silent men." He did not hear himself, but the thought itself was a tumultuous thing within him. It came upon him like an inundation, a sudden and thrilling inspiration backed by the forces of a visual truth. The Valley of Silent Men. He repeated the words, staring at the three colossal heads in the sky. Somewhere near them, under them, one side or the other, was Moret's hidden valley. He went on. A strange joy consumed him in it. At times, his grief was obliterated, and it seemed to him in these moments that Moret must surely be at the valley to greet him when he came to it. But always a tragedy of the death chute came back to him, and with it the thought that the three giant heads were watching and would always watch for a beloved lost one who would never return. As the sun went down that day, the face bowed to the valley seemed alive with the fire of a living question sent directly to Kent. "Where is she?" it asked. "Where is she? Where is she?" That night Kent did not sleep. The next day there lay ahead of him a low and broken range, the first of the deeper mountains. He climbed this steadily, and at noon had reached the crest, and he knew that at last he was looking down into the Valley of Silent Men. It was not a wide valley like the other. On the far side of it, 3 or 4 miles away, rose the huge mountain, whose face was looking down upon the green meadows at its foot. Southward Kent could see for a long distance, and in the vivid sunlight he saw the shimmer of creeks and little lakes, and the rich glow of thick patches of cedar and spruce and balsam, scattered like great rugs of velvety luster amid the flowering green of the valley. Northward, 3 or 4 miles away, he turned in this direction after he had rested. It was 4 o'clock when he came to the elbow in the valley and could look down into the hidden part of it. What he saw at first was a giant cup hollowed out of the surrounding mountains, a cup 2 miles from brim to brim, the end of the valley itself. It took him a few moments to focus his vision so that he would pick up the smaller and more intimate things half a mile under him. And yet, before he had done this, a sound came up to him that set aquiver every nerve in his body. It was the far-round, hollow-sounding barking of a dog. The warm, golden haze that precedes sunset in the mountains was gathering between him and the valley. But through this he made out, after a time, evidences of human habitation. There was a small lake, out of which ran a shimmering creek, and close to this lake, yet equally near to the base of the mountain on which he was standing, were a number of buildings and a stockade which looked like a toy. He could see no animals, no movement of any kind. Without seeking for a downward trail, he began to descend. Again, he did not question himself. An overwhelming certainty possessed him. Of all places in the world, this must be the Valley of Silent Men, and below him, flooded and half hidden in the elusive sun mist, was Moret's old home. It seemed to him now that it belonged to him, that he was a part of it. In going to it, he was achieving his last great resting place, his final refuge, his own home. And the thought became strangely a part of him, A welcome must be waiting for him there. He hurried until his breath came pantingly between his lips, and he was forced to rest. And at last he found himself where his progress was made a foot at a time, and again and again. He was forced to climb back and detour around treacherous slides and precipitous breaks, which left sheer falls. The mist thickened in the valley, the sun sank behind the western peaks, and swiftly after that, the gloom of twilight deepened. It's 7 o'clock when he came to the edge of the plain, at least a mile below the elbow, which shut out the cup in the valley. He was exhausted. His hands were bruised and bleeding. Darkness shut him in when he went on. When he rounded the elbow of the mountain, he did not try to keep back the joyous cry that came to his lips. Ahead of him there were lights. A few of them were scattered, but nearest to him he saw a cluster of them, like the glow that comes from a number of illumined windows. He quickened his pace as he drew nearer to them, and at last he wanted to run. And then something stopped him, and it seemed to him that his heart had risen into his throat and was choking him until he could not breathe. It was a man's voice he heard, calling through the twilight gloom. Marette, Marette, Marette. Kent tried to cry out, but his breath came only in a gasp. He felt himself trembling. He reached out his arms, and a strange madness rushed like fire into his brain. Again the voice called, Marette, Marette, Marette. The cup in the valley echoed the name. It rolled softly up the mountainside. The air trembled with it, whispered it, passed it on, and suddenly the madness in Kent found voice, and he shouted, Marette, Marette. He ran on. His knees felt weak. He shouted the name again, and the other voice was silent. Things loomed up out of the mist ahead of him, between him and the glowing windows. Someone, 2 people, were advancing to meet him, doubtfully, wonderingly. Kent was staggering, but he cried the name again, and this time it was a woman's cry that answered, and one of the 2 came toward him swift as a flash of light. 3 paces apart they stood, and in that gloom of the after twilight their burning eyes looked at each other. For a space their bodies remained stricken in the face of this miracle of a great and merciful God. The dead had risen. By a mighty effort Kent reached out his arms, and Marette swayed to him. When the other man came up, he found them crumpled to their knees on the earth, clasped like children in each other's arms. And as Kent raised his face, he saw that it was Sandy McTrigger who was looking down at him, the man whose life he had saved at Athabasca Landing. Chapter 25. How long it was before his brain cleared, Kent never could have told. It might have been a minute or an hour. Every vital force that was in him had concentrated into a single consciousness that the dead had come to life, that it was Marette Radisson, the flesh and blood and living warmth of her he held in his arms. Like a flash of a picture on a screen, he had seen McTrigger's face close to him, then his own head, was crushed down again, and if the valley had been filled with the roar of cannon, he would have heard only one sound, a sobbing voice crying over and over again, "Jeemes, Jeemes, Jeemes." It was Matriga in the beginning of the starlight, who alone looked with clear vision upon the wonder of the thing that was happening. After a little, Kent realized that Matriga was talking, that a hand was on his shoulder, that the voice was both joyous and insistent. He rose to his feet, still holding Marette, her arms clinging to him. Her breath was sobbing and broken, and it was impossible for Kent to speak. He seemed to stumble over the distance between them and the lights, with Matriga on the other side of Marette. It was Matriga who opened a door, and they came into a glow of lamplight. It was a great, strange-looking room. They entered, and over the threshold, Marette's hands dropped from Kent. Kent stepped back, so that in the light they faced each other, and in that moment came the marvelous readjustment from shock and disbelief to a glorious certainty. Again, Kent's brain was as clear as the day he faced death at the head of the chute, and swift as a hot barb. Fear leaped into him as his eyes met the eyes of the girl. She was terribly changed. Her face was white, with a whiteness that startled him. It was thin. Her eyes were great, slumbering pools of violet, almost black in the lamp glow, and her hair piled high on her head as he had seen it that first day at Cardigan's, added to the telltale pallor in her cheeks. A hand trembled at her throat, and its thinness frightened him. For a space, a flash of seconds, she looked at him as if possessed of the subconscious fear that he was not Jim Kent. And then slowly her arms opened and she reached them out to him. She did not smile. She did not cry out. She did not speak his name now, but her arms went round his neck as he took her to him, and her face dropped on his breast. He looked at Matriga. A woman was standing beside him, a dark-haired, dark-eyed woman, and she had laid a hand on Matriga's arm. Kent, looking at them, understood. The woman came to him. "I had better take her now, monsieur," she said. "Markham will tell you, and a little later you may see her again." Her voice was low and soft. At the sound of it, Marette raised her head, and her two hands stole to Kent's cheeks in their old sweet way, and she whispered, "Kiss me, Jeemes, my Jeemes, kiss me." Chapter 26. A little later, clasping hands in the lamp glow, Kent and Sandy Matriga stood alone in the big room. In their hand-clasp was the warm thrill of strong men met in an immutable brotherhood. Each had faced death for the other. Yet this thought, subconsciously and forever a part of them, expressed itself only in the grip of their fingers and in the understanding that lay deep in their eyes. In Kent's face, the great question was of Marette. Matriga saw the fear of it, and slowly he smiled, a glad and yet an anxious smile, as he looked toward the door through which Marette and the older woman had gone. "Thank God you have come in time." he said, still holding Kent's hand. "She thought you were dead. And I know, Kent, that it was killing her. We had to watch her at night. Sometimes she would wander out into the valley. She was looking for you. It was that way tonight. Kent gulped hard. I understand now, he said. It was the living soul of her that was pulling me here. He took his pack with its precious contents from his shoulders, listening to McTrigger. They sat down. What McTrigger was saying seemed of trifling consequence beside the fact that Marette was somewhere beyond the other door, alive, and that he would see her again very soon. He did not see why McTrigger should tell him that the older woman was his wife. Even the fact that but he listened. He heard McTrigger tell how Marette had searched for him those days when he was lost in fever at Andre Boileau's cabin. How she had given him up for dead. Later, he would marvel over these things, but now he listened, and his eyes turned toward the door. It was then that McTrigger drove something home. It was like a shot piercing Kent's brain. McTrigger was speaking quietly of O'Connor, he said. It was he who brought Marette back home through the sulphur country. O'Connor. Kent sprang to his feet. It took McTrigger but a moment to read the truth in his face. Good God, you mean to tell me you do not know, Kent? He whispered tensely, rising in front of the other. Have not you seen O'Connor? Have not you come in touch with the police anywhere within the last year? Do not you know? I know nothing, breathed Kent. For a space, McTrigger stared at him in amazement. I have been in hiding, said Kent. All this time I have been keeping away from the police. McTrigger drew a deep breath. Again his hands gripped Kent's, and his voice was incredulous, filled with a great wonder. And you have come to her old home, believing that Marette killed Kedsty. It is hard to believe, and yet into his face came suddenly a look of grief, almost of pain, and Kent, following his eyes, saw that he was looking at a big stone fireplace in the end of the room. It was O'Connor who worked the thing out last winter, he said, speaking with an effort. I must tell you, before you see her again, you must understand everything. It will not do to have her tell you. See, Kent followed him to the fireplace. From the shelf over the stonework, McTrigger took a picture and gave it to him. It was a snapshot, a picture of a bare-headed man standing in the open, with the sun shining on him. A low cry broke from Kent's lips. It was the great grey ghost of a man he had seen in the lightning flare at night from the window of his hiding place in Kedsty Bungalow. My brother, said McTrigger chokingly. I loved him. For 40 years we were comrades, and Marette belonged to us, half and half. It was he who killed John Barclay. And then after a moment in which McTrigger fought to speak steadily, he added, and it was he, my brother, who also killed Inspector Kedsty. For a matter of seconds, there was a dead silence between them. McTrigger looked into the fireplace instead of at Kent. Then he said, he killed those men, but he did not murder them, Kent. It could not be called that. It was justice, single-man justice, without going to law. If it was not for Maret, I would not tell you about it, not the horrible part of it. I do not like to bring it up in my memory. I think that Maret loves you as Marie loved Donald, and Donald's love was more than that. It was worship. We came into the new mountain country, the three of us, even before the big strikes at Dawson and Bonanza. It was a wild country, a savage country, and there were few women in it. But Marie came with Donald. She was beautiful, with hair and eyes like Maret's. That was the tragedy of it. I will not tell you the details. They were terrible. It happened while Donald and I were out on a hunt. 3 men, white men, remember that, Kent? White men came out of the north and stopped at the cabin. When we returned, what we found there drove us mad. Marie died in Donald's arms, and leaving her there, alone, we set out after the white-skinned brutes who had destroyed her. Only a blizzard saved them, Kent. Their trail was fresh when the storm came. Had it held off another 2 hours, I too would have killed. From that day, Donald and I became manhunters. We traced the back trail of the 3 fiends and discovered who they were. 2 years later, Donald found one of the 3 on the Yukon, and before he killed him, he made him verify the names of the other 2. It was a long search after that, Kent. It has covered 30 years. Donald grew old faster than I, and I knew after a time that he was strangely mad. He would be gone for months at a time, always searching for the 2 men. 10 years passed, and then, one day, in the deep of winter, we came on a cabin, home that had been stricken with the plague, the smallpox. It was the home of Pierre Radisson and his wife, Andrea. Both were dead, but there was a little child still living. Almost a babe in arms. We took her, Donald and I. The child was Maret. McTrigger had spoken almost in a monotone. He had not raised his eyes from the ash of the fireplace, but now he looked up suddenly at Kent. "We worshipped her from the beginning," he said, his voice a bit husky. I hoped that love for her would save Donald. It did in a way, but it did not cure his madness, his desire for vengeance. We came farther east. We found this marvelous valley and gold in the mountains, untouched by other men. We built here, and I hoped even more that the glory of this new world we had discovered would help Donald to forget. I married, and my wife loved Maret. We had a child, and then another, and both died. We loved Maret more than ever after that. And my wife was the daughter of a missioner, and capable of educating Maret up to a certain point. You will find this place filled with all kinds of books, and reading and music. But the time came when we thought we must send Maret to Montreal. It broke her heart, and then, a long time after, McTrigger paused a moment, looking into Kent's eyes. And then, one day, Donald came in from Dawson City, terrible in his madness, and told us that he had found his men. One of them was John Barclay, the rich timberman, and the other was Kedsty, inspector of police at Athabasca Landing. Kent made no effort to speak. His amazement, as McTrigger had gone on, was beyond the expression of words. The night held for him a cumulative shock, the discovery that Maret was not dead, but alive. Now, the discovery that he, Jim Kent, was no longer a hunted man, and that it was O'Connor, his old comrade, who had run the truth down. With dry lips, he simply nodded, urging McTrigger to continue. "I knew what would happen if Donald went after Barclay and Kedsty," said the older man, "and it was impossible to hold him back. He was mad, clean mad. There was just one thing for me to do. I left here first, with the intention of warning the two brutes who had killed Donald's wife. I knew, with the evidence in our hands, they could do nothing but make a getaway, no matter how rich or powerful they were. Our evidence was complete, and through many years we'd kept track of the movements of our witnesses. I tried to explain to Donald that we could send them to prison, but there was but one thought in his poor sick mind: to kill. I was younger and beat himself, and after that I made my fatal mistake. I thought I was far enough ahead of him to get down to the line of rail and back before he arrived. You see, I figured his love for Moret would take him to Montreal first, and I had made up my mind to tell her everything so that she might understand the necessity of holding him if he went to her. I wrote everything to her and told her to remain in Montreal. She did that, you know. She set out for the north as soon as she received my letter." McTrigger's shoulders hunched lower. "Well, you know what happened, Kent. Donald got ahead of me after all. I came the day after Barclay was killed. I took it as a kind fate that the day preceding the killing I shot a grouse for my dinner, and as the bird was only wounded when I picked it up, I got blood on the sleeves of my coat. I was arrested. Kedsty, everyone, was sure they had the real man, and I kept quiet, except to maintain my innocence. I could say nothing that would turn the law on Donald's trail. After that, things happened quickly. You, my friend, made your false confession to save one who had done you a poor service years ago. Almost simultaneously with that, Moret had come. She came quietly in the night and went straight to Kedsty. She told him everything, showed him the written evidence, telling him this evidence was in the hands of others and would be used if anything happened to her. Her power over him was complete. As the price of her secrecy, she demanded my release, and in that black hour, your confession gave Kedsty his opportunity. He knew you were lying. He knew it was Donald who had killed Barclay. Yet he was willing to sacrifice you to save himself. Moret remained in his house, waiting and watching for Donald, while I searched for him on the trails. That is why she secretly lived in Kedsty's house. She knew that Donald would come there sooner or later, if I did not find him and get him away. She loved you, Kent. From that first hour she came to you in the hospital, and she tried to exact your freedom also as an added price for her secrecy. But Kedsty had become like a cornered tiger. He freed you, he saw his whole world crumbling under his feet. He too went a little mad, I think. He told Moret that he would not free you, that he would go to the hangman first. Then, Kent, came the night of your freedom, and a little later Donald came to Kedsty's home. It was he whom you saw that night out in the storm. He entered and killed Kedsty. Smuthing dragged Moret down to the room that night. She found Kedsty in his chair, dead. Donald was gone. It was then that you found her there. Kent, she loved you, and you will never know how her heart bled when she let you think she had killed Kedsty. She has told me everything. It was her fear for Donald, her desire to keep all possible suspicion from him until he was safe, that compelled her not to confide even in you. Later, when she knew that Donald must be safe, she was going to tell you, and then you were separated at the chute. McTrigger paused, and Kent saw him choke back a grief that was still like the fresh cut of a knife in his heart. He defied Kedsty's command to go to Fort Simpson and was on his way back to Athabasca Landing when he found my brother. But I guess God must have meant it that way. Donald was dying. And in dying, for a space, his old reason returned to him. It was from him, before he died, that O'Connor learned everything. The story is known everywhere now. It is marvelous that you did not hear. There came an interruption, the opening of a door, and McTrigger stood looking at them where, a little time before, she had disappeared with Marette. There was a glad smile in her face. Her dark eyes were glowing with a new happiness. First they rested on McTrigger's face, and then on Kent's. "Marette is much better," she said in her soft voice. "She is waiting to see you, Monsieur Kent. Will you come now?" Like one in a dream, Kent went toward her. He picked up his pack, for with its precious contents, it had become to him like his own flesh and blood. And as the woman led the way, and Kent followed her, McTrigger did not move from the fireplace. In a little while, Anne McTrigger came back into the room. Her beautiful eyes were aglow. She was smiling softly, and putting her arms about the shoulders of the man at the fireplace, she whispered, "I have looked at the night through the window, Malcolm. I think that the stars are bigger and brighter than they have been in a long time, and the Watcher seems like a living God up in the sky. Come, please." She took his hand, and Malcolm went with her. Over their heads burned a glory of stars. The wind came gently up the valley, cool with the freshness of the mountain tops, sweet with the smell of meadow and flowers. And when the woman pointed through the glow, Malcolm McTrigger looked up at the Watcher, and for an instant he fancied that he saw what she had seen, something that was life instead of death, a glow of understanding and of triumph in the mighty face of stone, above the lace mists of the clouds. For a long time they walked on, and deep in the heart of the woman, a voice cried out again and again that the Watcher knew, and that it was a living joy she saw up there. For up to that, unmoving and voiceless God of the mountains, she had cried and laughed and sung and even prayed. And with her, Marette had also done these things, until at last the pulse and beat of women's souls had given a spirit to a form of rock. Back in the chateau which Malcolm McTrigger and his brother Donald had built of logs, in a room whose windows faced the Watcher himself, Marette was unveiling the last of mystery for Jim Kent. And this too was her hour of triumph. Her lips were red and warm with the flush brought there by Kent's love. Her face was like the wild roses he had crushed under his feet all that day. For in this hour the world had come to her and had prostrated itself at her feet. The sacred contents of the pack were in her lap as she leaned back in the great blanketed and pillowed chair that had been her invalid's nest for many days. But it was an invalid's nest no longer. The floods of life were pounding through her body again, and in that hour when Malcolm Trigger and his wife were gone, Kent looked upon the miracle of its change. And now Moret gave to him a little packet, and while Kent opened it, she raised both hands to her head and unbound her hair so that it fell about her in shining and glorious confusion. Kent, unwrapping a last bit of tissue paper, found in his hands a long tress of hair. "See, Sheems, it has grown fast since I cut it that night." She leaned a little toward him, parting her hair with slim white fingers, so that he saw again where the hair had been clipped the night of Kedsty's death. And then she said, "You may keep it always if you want to, Dooms, for I cut it from my head when I left you in the room below, and when you almost believed I had killed Kedsty. It was this." She gave him another packet, and her lips tightened a little as Kent unwrapped it, and another tress of hair shimmered in the lamp glow. "That was Father Donald's," she whispered. It was all he had left of Marie, his wife, and at night when Kedsty died. "I understand," cried Kent, stopping her. "He choked Kedsty with it until he was dead. And when I found it around Kedsty's neck, you let me think it was yours. To save Father Donald." She nodded. "Yes, James. If the police had come, they would have thought I was guilty. I planned to let them think so until Father Donald was safe. But all the time I had here in my breast this other tress, which would prove that I was innocent when the time came. And now, James." She smiled at him again and reached out her hands. "Oh, I feel so strong, and I want to take you out now and show you my valley, James. Our valley, yours and mine, in the starlight. Not tomorrow, James, but tonight." Now, a little later, the Watcher looked down on them, even as it had looked down on another man and another woman who had preceded them. But the stars were bigger and brighter, and the white cap of snow that rested on the Watcher's head like a crown caught the faint gleam of a faraway light. And after that, slowly and wonderfully, other snow-crested mountain tops caught that greeting radiance of the moon. But it was the Watcher who stood out like a mighty god among them all. And when they came to the elbow in the plain, Maret drew Kent down beside her. "Always, from a little child, I have sat and played on this rock, with the Watcher looking like that," she said in a low voice. "I have grown to love him, James, and I have always believed that he was gazing off there, night and day, into the east, watching for something that was coming to me. Now I know it was you, James. And James, when I was away, down there in the big city, her fingers gripped his thumb in their old way, and Kent waited. It was the watcher that made me want to come home most of all, she went on, a bit of tremble in her voice. Oh, I grew lonely for him, and I could see him in my dreams at night, watching, 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 and sometimes even calling me. James, do you see that hump on his left shoulder, like a great epaulette? Yes, I see, said Kent. Beyond that, on a straight line from here, hundreds of miles away, are Dawson City, the Yukon, the big gold country, men, women, civilization. Father Malcolm and Father Donald have never found but one trail to this side of the mountains, and I have been over it 3 times, to Dawson, but the watcher's back is on those things. Sometimes I imagine it was he who built those great ramparts through which few men come. He wants this valley alone, and so do I, alone with you and with my people. Kent drew her close in his arms. When you are stronger, he whispered, we will go over that hidden trail together, past the watcher, toward Dawson, for it must be that over there we will find a missioner. He paused. Please go on, James, and you will be my wife. Yes, yes, James, forever and ever. But James, her arms crept up about his neck. And in that month there come through the mountains each year a man and a woman to visit us. Mother Anne's father, and Mother Anne's father, yes, is a missioner, James. And Kent, looking up in this hour of his triumph and joy, believed that in the watcher's face he caught for an instant the passing radiance of a smile. And now the valley is quiet once again. The wind moves softly through the tall pines. The rivers continue their endless journey through the wilderness, and the stories of the valley settle gently into the night. Our journey through the valley of silent men has reached its end, but stories like this never truly disappear. They live on in the quiet places of the world, in the sound of distant forests, and in the imagination of those who listen. If you found peace in this journey, if the quiet of the valley helped you rest tonight, then you are always welcome to return here again. Thank you for walking this path with me. Now the fire is fading, the valley sleeping, and it is time for you to rest as well. Close your eyes. Let the calm of the wilderness surround you and drift peacefully into sleep. We will meet soon with a new story.